Hey everyone, thank you for joining us at one of our online services this weekend. It is really great to be with you, and rest assured, our church is still beautiful, it's still moving forward, and there are still great things we get to accomplish, even in the midst of all the challenges that we now face. Now, the church is in a truly unique position, and I would say this way, the church has been given a unique responsibility to do two things. And this has been the responsibility of the church since the very beginning of the church, which is to communicate the message of Jesus. But the second part of all of what that means to communicate the message of Jesus is this: to demonstrate the message of Jesus. Today, we're going to give all of you an opportunity, or invite you to demonstrate that message. We're going to invite you to take bold and courageous steps towards helping those that are the most vulnerable, some of the hardest hit by the coronavirus and its associated restrictions, the elderly, and those who are the most economically disadvantaged. And so, in so doing, to the extent that you're willing or able to do so, we're going to challenge you to act courageously, but not recklessly. And for those of you who are not able to participate by stepping into this kind of stuff, we're going to ask you and challenge you to support those who are able to do so with your generous financial support.
6 months ago, we had determined that this would be the weekend in which we highlighted the way that you are making a difference in our community through outreach ministry. And I just want to tell you, I am blown away by God's perfect timing that this weekend we would be poised to make a difference in the community amongst what's going on. And so I want to say I am so grateful for you, our church family. There are so many of you that are reaching out, asking how you might help those that are in need during this time. Already, there's a team of dedicated volunteers that are making a critical impact in our community by serving those that are amongst the most vulnerable. And so I want you to know that the OC sheriffs and other government-designated food distribution centers have contacted us, seeking our help to ensure that those that are amongst the most vulnerable will be cared for during these times. The state and local authorities have determined that we are a critical and vital resource for our community.
I consider it a great honor to be able to serve alongside you, to serve with you in this way during this moment, to make an impact during this moment in our history. And so thank you once again. May God bless you as you join us for our online service.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, you his angels, mighty in strength, who perform his word, obeying the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all you his hosts, you who serve him, doing his will. Bless the Lord, O my soul. That's what we're going to do today. We pray that these songs just fill your house with worship, that the message, that the word just fills your home as we worship him, as we point our hearts to him. Let's worship him together.
You high
God, we will choose to praise your name. Through every situation of our life, Lord, we will choose to praise your name, God. We will choose to trust you, Lord. We will choose to turn to you, Lord. In our anxiety, in our doubts, in our worries, we will choose, God, to look towards you in faith, Lord.
For me Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The truth is spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. And we sing, and hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning, they sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Declare, then came the morning, they sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe, and out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. And Jesus, yours is the victory. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Yes, God, you are my living
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Harbor Point Church. Thanks so much for joining us online today. Whether you're watching with your family or watching by yourself, you are not alone. You are amongst friends. We are a community of normal people learning to know Jesus more deeply, follow him more intently, and hopefully show his love to the world more courageously. It has been incredible to watch our life groups, Bible studies, and students finding ways to connect and gather even from home. They're continuing to gather with one another, pray with one another, and spend time in God's word even while they can't meet together physically. God is doing some incredible things even in the midst of what could seem like uncertain times. And if you're joining us today online through our website, you can see that we have some new ways for you to connect and chat. We have ways for you to receive prayer from our pastors, and we have links to the things that you need, like our outline, recent messages, and our Instagram. We are dedicated to finding new ways for you to be in community and connect with the church that you love. One of the ways that we worship is through giving. Giving connects us to God and shapes us to become more generous people. Giving is an act of joy, not out of obligation. And in times like these, we know what an incredible blessing it is to be a part of something beyond ourselves. There are a number of ways for you to give today. You can give online through the link on our website. You can text HP Give to 9700, or you can give on our app. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow us on our social media. We want to stay connected with you throughout the week, be praying for one another, and stay up to date on the ways that we can serve our community during this time. So let's take a minute and say hi to one another. You can encourage one another, say hi, go onto our Instagram and comment on our post. Let people know that they are not alone. And as always, direct message us if you have anything that you need. We would love to come alongside of you and help you in any way that we can.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at Harbor Point Church, and especially thank you those of you who are joining from all over the place. Last week we got a chance to look as we kind of gathered for our second weekend of online church only, kind of a weird thing for us, but interesting to look at a couple of things. One of them was, because people are watching online, we can see where people are watching from. There's a group of people from Ohio, about 50 people, or 50 devices at least, that tuned in last week. So hey to Ohio, good to see you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying, the miserable weather out where you are. So go Cleveland. Also interesting, we had one person who was watching the service last weekend from Belize. So what's up, Belize? I mean, we're huge in Belize. We got one person there who's tuning in. And I found out this week, by the way, I just assumed that everybody in Belize spoke Spanish. Turns out the official language is English. So hey, anyway, good to see you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying your week as much as you can, given the weird, bizarre time that we're in. As so many people are adapting and trying to make their way through to do the best that they can to, kind of continue with whatever they're going through. I mean, there's a lot of us, worldwide, we're all kind of in a similar boat to try to figure out how to continue on with what we know and how we're supposed to be. This week as I was looking at some of the stuff, looking at headlines, as all of us are, there's no way you cannot avoid a conversation about the coronavirus. Sometimes you don't always get the best stuff. It's hard to find really good news, but CNN, of course, at the top of the list of sort of the bad news bearers of this past week, one of the things they said was this pandemic risks bringing out the worst in humanity, which maybe you can attest to that. Maybe you tried to go shopping this week and you got run over by a shopping cart, or maybe, something happened to you. Maybe you can, this is like, you're like, yes, that's definitely me, for sure. But I think there's also some other things that have come out that are also really, really cool. Maybe you saw this is on Twitter. It's not a great picture because it's from Twitter, but there's this guy who is he's a fitness instructor in Spain. He's on a roof, and all of these people in these apartment buildings around him, they're watching him as he's leading them through some exercises. Obviously he's at appropriate social distance. He's a whole, roof apart from other people. And then there were these kids I saw, again, not the best picture, but you saw these kids on TV. These two guys are, obviously they're dressed really, really nicely, but they're playing their cello for this woman here who is, clearly she's old and has, she has to keep her distance. And they're just a little bit of a ray of light right there, a little bit of something great there. And then, of course, it was hard to miss all of the folks in Italy. This is an Italian balcony. These guys are, there's stories of people singing the national anthem. There are people busting out their instruments, just trying to do something in the midst of all this confusion and all of this sort of disarray. And what we're finding in all of this stuff is this: that in the midst of all the confusion, in the midst of all of the fear that people are facing, people still long for one really important thing. They're still hoping to find something, and that thing is joy. In the midst of everything that people are facing, people are looking to move forward. They're wanting to figure out a way to not be paralyzed, and they're hoping to find joy. Now, especially when fear and paralysis are the most expected things, joy becomes incredibly enticing. It becomes incredibly it becomes the thing people really, really long for. You know, what's surprising is that in the early church, in times like these, in the most desperate times, it's actually when the church began to expand, not unlike the times we're in now, where there's a lot of confusion, and a lot of disarray, a lot of doubt, a lot of anger, perhaps. That's when the church began to grow. And the question we've been asking over the past couple of weeks in our series, The Living Proof, is the question, why? I mean, how did the church expand, you know, in post sort of Jesus ministry, in the sense that his life ministry and, you know, his death and resurrection had already happened in the multiple decades since people there would have been, you know, alive witnesses who would have been there when he taught or when he healed people, or long after people themselves could have said, oh yeah, I have a story where he actually, he healed me. And there was, long after that, people began to still began to gravitate towards Jesus. And we have to ask the question, what was the magnetism towards Jesus? You know, even though Jesus' ministry had ended many, many decades before. Well, in short, I guess you could say it this way, that the message of Jesus' followers was this: life with Jesus is better than life without Jesus. That's the simplest way to say it. I mean, there's a lot more to it, obviously, than that. But simply, Jesus' followers' messages was like this: look, being attached to him is better than not being attached to him. In fact, for better or for worse, the proof of the message of Jesus' followers, that being attached to him is better than not being attached to him, the proof of the message of Jesus' followers is always Jesus' followers. And somehow, even as Jesus would say this, with his own followers, he too would say, look, your life, the way that you live, gives evidence of what God is doing in and through you. Here's what he says in Matthew 5 to his own followers. He says this: in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So Jesus seems to be pointing out this idea that the way we gauge the effectiveness of the follower of people who follow him isn't going to be in their otherwise sort of expected religious activity. It's going to be in something else. People tend to associate with all religious communities of all different types a religious kind of activity. And those things are like this, which you might expect. Certain set of songs or, you know, music that accompanies it. There's certain rituals that go along with that. Usually there's some version of prayer that accompanies religious communities. And that kind of falls under the big umbrella of what we might call worship. But to read the Bible, there's another layer to worship that has a tendency to get overlooked because it doesn't always seem like worship. And yet here's about 750 to 800 years before Jesus, a guy named Isaiah, is writing to God's people and giving them this instruction. Check this out. He says this. Now remember, this is God's voice to God's people through this person Isaiah. Here's what it says in Isaiah 58. For day after day, they seek me out. Now remember, God's talking about his own people. They seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. So obviously God's a little bit upset at his own people there. Notice he says, they ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near to them. The people seem, this is really important language, the people seem as though they want God to be in their midst. And they appear as though they want God to come near to them. They ask, in God's own words, he's kind of paraphrasing what his own people would say, verse 3. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? So there's all this religious activity. God is looking at his own people, and he's kind of pointing out to them, this is their own act of worship. And they're wondering, we want to see God, and we haven't really seen him. Where did he go? But God will say, this is not the extent of the worship he's intended. Skipping down to verse 6, here's what he says. Of all the religious things that you do, here's what I want to see. Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? Now remember, fasting is part of the religious activity of people connected to Israel's God. This is people who are, going without things to indicate their faithfulness. And he says, is this not the kind of fasting I've chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. He continues, verse 7. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? In other words, the kind of worship that God seems to be longing for isn't the kind of ongoing religious rituals that get associated with religious communities. there's something else. Apparently, what God's really passionate about is when people share their food with the hungry, and they provide the poor wanderer with shelter. That apparently is what God intended for people when it comes to worship. Now, one intention of worship, as we mentioned before, as we talk about a lot of times, is one of the ways people, when they talk about worship, it's about drawing closer to God and finding a way to do that. Skipping down a little bit in the passage, God will explain what this looks like when people do these things and engage in this kind of worship. It's in Isaiah 58, 8 through 12, and I'll just read it to you, but here's what it says. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then it will say this, then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land. And he will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. And your people will rebuild ancient ruins. You will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. You see, apparently God's intention for his people when they worship him isn't simply that they would conduct religious sorts of things, but rather what God's intention is that people would be about his work in the world. To even take this about another 700 or so years after this, Jesus will say something really similar to his own followers, that there's something about God's people being actively involved in the world which is critical to their own understanding of what it means to worship. So this is what Jesus says to his followers in Luke 10. Here's what he says. It says, after this, the Lord, meaning Jesus, appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. In other words, these people are setting the stage for Jesus to arrive. They're going to go. There's 72 followers of Jesus. These disciples are being sent out by him. They're going to go into towns and prepare the way for Jesus for where he's about to go. Then he tells them this, verse 2. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, meaning God, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And then notice what he says. Go, I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves, as if to say, this is not going to be an easy task. What's ahead of you isn't something that's just easy for anybody to do. I'm sending you specifically to go into a place that might otherwise be hostile. And he uses the analogy of lambs among wolves. Skipping down to verse 8, here's what he says. When you enter a town and are welcomed, eat what is offered to you. And then notice what he says. Heal the sick who are there and tell them the kingdom of God has come near to you. Now, I'm going to say something that is so unbelievably and painfully obvious here. I just want to make sure this is clear. When people are being sent to heal the sick, it obviously and clearly presupposes that they're not well, which means they're not doing well at the time of the people's arrival. I know that's incredibly obvious. I know none of you are like, well, I'm going to write that. That's a note to write down. I just want to make sure you understand, as we talk about the idea of healing the sick, there is a clear need that God's people are being sent to. And when they do so, when they go to be among these people, they can pronounce that God's kingdom is really close to them. Remember that people are longing for God to dwell close to them. Now, I want you to understand is we take this, the early church, first of all, began to really, really take this idea incredibly seriously. The early church had as part of its own being, they had an understanding that this was part of obviously what people just did. In fact, as we talk about it, those who are stuck in their houses, those people who are in need of healing aren't looking at the church going, gosh, I hope the church can get back to their regular form of worship where they're having their ritual and singing their songs and doing those other things. Those people who are sick, who are longing for healing, are waiting for the church and for the people that occupy it to come and be the church as they're intended to be. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, a couple of plagues struck all of ancient Rome. And so this is like, Rome is under incredible duress. There's, in some cases, a quarter or a third of whole cities are being wiped out by a plague. And there's this picture that begins to form. And it's the picture that begins to form in the early church about their particular kind of worship, because I want to point this out. Worship, as we talk about it, is this. It is the activation of God's people to accomplish his plan and purposes. And the early church, even in those really dire circumstances in the 3rd and 4th century, began to take this incredibly seriously. These are people who understood the idea of being the living proof of who God is at a very, very early time. Now, check this out. There is a Roman emperor, a guy named Julian the Apostate. So, because he's one of the last, he's kind of later in the Roman Empire. But I want you to see, as he's talking about in the midst of these plagues, here's what he says to his own priest, like a pagan priest. He goes, I want you to notice something. Here's what he says. When it came about that the poor were overlooked and neglected by the pagan priests, meaning our own priests, then the impious Galileans, that's a phrase describing these people who are attached to Jesus, the followers of Jesus, the Christians. Then the impious Galileans observed this fact and devoted themselves. They devoted themselves to support not only their poor, meaning like the Christian crew, our own little our own bubble. He's like, no, they devoted themselves to support not only their poor, but ours as well. And all men, meaning everybody, sees that our people lack aid from us, the most authoritative power in the land. They're not getting help from us. They're getting help from these people, the impious Galileans, who managed to find and be a way to act as the living proof of what God has intended for his own people in the world. Now, I have a friend who... his name's Tim Timmons, and he's a buddy of mine. We've been friends since junior high. And he's kind of on this, crusade, call, I don't know what you call it, but his intent is to try to help the church. If you were to divide, if you look at the total number of minutes in a week, there's 10,080 minutes in a week. And he pointed out to me wisely, he just goes, look, of the 80 minutes where we gather roughly on a weekend, that tends to be where most people imagine that their worship is. And what he says is, the effectiveness of those 80 minutes of gathering together, hopefully it's not 80 minutes today, but in other words, the effectiveness of those 80 minutes of gathering can always be gauged by how the other 10,000 minutes are lived. That's the living proof kind of moment. Now, the outcome of this kind of life, this kind of living with this kind of intent to be in the world like this, to be seeking for the help of those people who are suffering in some kind of way. The result, the outcome of this looks like this. Luke 10, verse 17, these people come back. The 72 returned with joy. Just let me pause right there. The lambs among the wolves have returned with joy. These are people who have come back to return to Jesus with what they found. And these lambs among the wolves say they were overwhelmed with a sense of joy. Here's what they said. So the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. And Jesus replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. It's as if what he's saying is, not only were the material needs met, there was a spiritual overcoming, a spiritual overpowering of evil itself that was undone by the work that you were doing when you were sent out among the poor, among those who needed help, among those who needed healing. Something else went on there. There was a spiritual victory over evil itself. Now, the outcome of serving our neighbor, and if you look at the Bible, when it refers to the idea of a neighbor, the outcome of serving our neighbor in their time of their greatest need, according to this passage, is this: joy. Joy. The truth is, what we're all looking for in a time of uncertainty is the experience of joy. And I don't want you to miss an opportunity for joy when you need it most. Maybe that's why an early church leader, in the time of an epidemic, this is a later epidemic in the 4th century, he actually says this, a guy named Dionysius of Alexandria, he says this: other people would not think this a time for festival, but far from being a time of distress, he says, it is a time of unimaginable joy. Like the combination of generosity and sacrificial kindness in the midst of darkness and despair is an occasion for joy. So here's the call on us. It's a kind of courage without recklessness, but it is a courage nonetheless. A lot of us have heard the phrase over and over again, we want to operate with an abundance of caution. And I just want to caution us about that very phrase and just simply to say, I don't want an abundance of caution to become an abundance of fear. We want to live with courage, but not recklessness. But we want to live with a kind of courage. We can move faster than the government. We don't have to be hindered by red tape. We can get into stuff faster and more effectively than so many other ways. And you've already shown that throughout your own story. Our church is a history of people going to those in need. We're going. That's what we do. We're going to move with courage into some stuff. And I realize in a time of fear, there's all kinds of reasons to back off, and you would be justified in doing so, and yet there's something you'll miss if that's what governs your life over the next couple of weeks or months. You'll just miss out on joy. I don't want you to miss on the joy that God intends for you to have. Now, I'm going to introduce you to Rob in a moment, and he's our outreach pastor, and he's going to help you engage in some ways, and maybe as we sort of talk about what that looks like, maybe as you engage in this very conversation, you might actually be able to experience a little bit of that unimaginable joy in maybe a way that you weren't thinking was even possible. So let me ask you this question. During this season, of all the craziness that's going on, what will you do to love courageously? At the end of all of this experience, everything else, when it's in August and we're all getting sunburned and we're all thinking back over the past couple months and we're all wondering what happened, the question you want to answer with, how did you love courageously? You don't want your answer to be, well, I had enough toilet paper and I had enough peanut butter to last and I made it. You want a story to tell your grandkids. You know what? I found a way to love courageously in a time when everybody else was operating in fear. What will you do to love courageously?
Hey church, I'm Rob Fernandez, the outreach pastor here at Harbor Point. What an incredible question to be asking ourselves. And I want to tell you, I want to affirm you, this is already a question that you have been asking. You've been reaching out via email, text, and phone call, essentially saying, what does it look like for us to step up as a church and love our community? I want to read to you from Ephesians 3. This is what it says in verses 20 to 21. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations forever and ever. Amen. His power is at work within you, church. In times of crisis, we get to stand confidently on the firm foundation of God's love and power. In times of crisis, we get to ask, what does it look like to serve our community well? And ultimately, in times of crisis, according to his power that is at work within us, we get to ask, what does it look like to love courageously? And so I get to walk us through what that's going to look like for our church. As we look at this, I want you to know this has always been a part of who we are. It's always been a part of who we are to ask, what does it look like to love courageously? Just now, it's essentially going to be in the way that we respond to care for those that are amongst the most vulnerable in our community. So this is what we're going to do. And this might sound familiar. We are going to pray, serve, and give. We're going to pray passionately. We're going to serve sacrificially, and we are going to give generously. I want to walk us through what it looks like for us to pray together as a church. I'm going to read from Psalm 119, and this is what it says. Your word, Lord, is eternal. It stands firm in the heavens. Your faithfulness continues out throughout all generations. You establish the earth, and it endures. We get to pray to and worship a God who is faithful and good. And so this next week, starting on Monday, we are going to have a 7-day prayer journey where we're going to pray for those that are at the most, amongst the most vulnerable in our community. We're going to pray for the elderly. We're going to pray for under-resourced families and their children. We're going to also pray for our government leaders, for healthcare workers, for teachers, for government military members and their families as well. And so I want to invite you into that, because starting Monday, you're going to be able to access this online. Every day we'll post a new prayer adventure for you to do alone or with your family. You could also follow us on Instagram. We're going to actually record these and stream these prayer days together. Would love for you to join us with that. Next is the way that we're going to serve. We're going to love courageously by the way that we serve. Harbor Point is partnered with Orange County Sheriffs as well as Family Assistance Ministries to meet the needs of those that are amongst the most vulnerable in our community. And so what this is going to look like, how are we going to do this? We are going to love courageously by the way that we serve. We've partnered with Orange County Sheriff as well as Family Assistance Ministries in our community to meet the needs of those that are amongst the most vulnerable, the elderly and under-resourced families and kids. And so I'm really excited to let you know that the way that we're going to do this is that we are first going to donate. We are going to donate food and supplies. And if you happen to, this last week was kind of crazy, but if you happen to have a lifetime supply of peanut butter and toilet paper, then this is a great opportunity to give back. Now, there's going to be a full list of what is actually needed with these local partners that we have on our website, and you can check that out. But here's what's really cool. In order to do this safe and responsibly, we've created a drive-through drop-off center right here at Harbor Point. And you can actually drive through and donate your goods into the bins, and we will begin to distribute that to our partners. So I would love every person, every family, every individual at our church gets to be a part of this. Donate these food and supply items that is needed for our partners at Orange County Sheriff and Family Assistance Ministries. Now here's the next step. First, we're going to donate, and next we're going to be part of the distribution network that is here in South Orange County. And so I invite you to consider what it would look like to help volunteer with these organizations that we've partnered with to help with sorting and food processing. Now, I think more than ever, we actually have an opportunity to say to our community, we love you, we care for you, and we are going to be a part of the solution to meet your needs. And so when it comes to distribution, you have an opportunity to volunteer with Family Assistance Ministries through partnership with Harbor Point to help sort and process their food. And let me tell you, the volunteership is needed. They are looking for people to help step up and say, we are going to sort the food so that we can get this to the people that need it the most. And then lastly, when it comes to serve, is going to be deliver. So when it comes to delivering food, there's also a need for elderly that are actually shut in, that are going by the recommendations of the CDC to stay home. They're sometimes having trouble accessing food. And so we get to step in and say, we'll be that buffer for you. We'll fill that gap. And we'll be able to deliver food right to their doorstep. Now, we're creating a streamlined process so that we can make sure that we are doing this in a safe manner to protect those that are the most vulnerable in our community. But I invite you to consider what it would look like to be someone who can help deliver these items to the doorsteps of those that are in need. Lastly, church, I want to invite you to consider what it would look like to give generously. You are already such a generous church. To look back over this year to see the impact that you have made has been outstanding. And right now, we have another opportunity for you to give generously towards outreach ministry. Our ability to make a difference is directly fueled by your generous giving. The way that our church serves the marginalized in our community, the way that we serve our military families and military members, the way that we are mobilized for disaster relief, the way that we engage with the global church is directly influenced and impacted by your generous giving. And so thank you. Church, you are a difference-making church. I'm inviting you right now to be a part of what that would look like. And so we've made it really easy for you to engage with generous giving. And the first is to do it online. Our online access, you can go to our website and give through there. But also, we've actually created a text message for you. And so the easiest way to access our text message is to text the number 97,000 with the word HP Outreach. And once you do that, you're going to get a text message back, and it's going to be a link. And when you click on that link, it'll let you set up online giving. You could set up recurring gifts so that you could subscribe to the work that Outreach is doing, and you can also give a one-time gift. Church, together, we are going to love our community courageously through prayer, through serving, and through giving.
That's how we love courageously. In a time of uncertainty, in a time of doubt, in a time where things are not clear, where the people that are at the bottom rungs of all of the economic impact, of all the social impact of a moment like this, they're the people that feel it first. And the people historically who have responded first and with the greatest courage have been the church. Here's our moment. It's going to be a great moment for the church, a moment perhaps for unimaginable joy. Now, next week, we're going to do something really cool. I want to just let you know. We're actually going to have a virtual online communion, and we're going to invite you during this week. We'll remind you to do this as well. We'll remind you to go and to pick up the elements. It doesn't have to be really complicated. You know, a little bit of bread, Wonder Bread and some punch if that's what you want. You got kids in your house. But a little bit of those communion elements. And we're going to celebrate communion together as a whole community of people, an online community. It's going to be really, really cool. And so, might God's grace and God's peace be present among you. Might you be aware of it as you go out into the world that is so desperate to find and to know that grace and that peace in a time of so much uncertainty. God bless you, and we will see you very soon.
Praise God from